Rise and rise again until lambs become lions. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my Masculine Feminine Energies film breakdown series with the 2010 film Robin Hood. If you're not familiar with what I mean by Masculine and Feminine Energies, I have a ton of videos on this content, but a brief summary. Masculine and Feminine Energies are energies lived in all of us. We all contain both energies. We have a core energy, this is when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And each of these energies contains archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. We have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. These opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into Robin Hood. This was actually a requested film. I am breaking down the 2010 version of Robin Hood starring Russell Crowe and Cate Blanchett. I had never seen this movie before, and it's interesting. I did not realize how many Robin Hood movies there actually have been. When I was actually looking up information about this movie and clips and things like that, there are so many Robin Hood movies out there. Like, it's a story that's been told so many times. To be honest with you, the only Robin Hood movie I really remember is the Disney version, and I was like, I don't know, I kind of liked when like Robin Hood was a fox and Little John was a big cuddly bear. I don't know, that's just the Disney princess in me. But overall, this movie has a lot of really great examples, specifically about masculinity in healthy and unhealthy versions. And so that's primarily what I'm gonna focus on in this breakdown. Before I get into this, I wanna take this opportunity to make a note, because I do get some, not a lot, but some pushback, particularly from some men who will say things like, you're a woman, what right do you have to talk about masculinity? Or who are you to teach men how to be masculine, or something like that. I want to clarify a little bit about the intent behind my content. When I talk about masculinity specifically, my intention is not to teach men how to be masculine. I used to work in a male-dominated field for years. I'm well aware that most men do not want to take advice from women, that most men do not feel comfortable being led or coached by women. I really do believe that it's masculine men that need to step up and be leaders and teach boys, and unfortunately now in our society, grown men, how to connect to their masculine energy. That said, if there are men who come to my content when I talk about masculinity, if they do learn something, or if something happens to spark their interest and they decide to learn more about masculinity, they decide to reach out to, you know, a male mentor, a men's coach, a men's group, or make any kind of positive change within themselves, then honestly, my content is worth it. Like, I'm all for that. But that's not the sole intent of my content. One of the reasons why I feel so compelled to talk about masculine energy as well as feminine energy is because in reality, most women are not going to feel truly safe to connect to their feminine energy if they don't feel safe around masculine men. And I know from my own experience, and I'm sure I'm not alone, that when I started learning about what healthy masculine energy was, I realized that I had really not experienced in my life interactions with men who were actually in their healthy masculine energy. So I had a lot of judgments about men, a lot of preconceived ideas about what masculine energy was, what masculinity was. And I think, like many women, I was just really confused, and I was having a lot of negative interactions with men that were giving me a lot of really limiting beliefs and ideas about men that were not helping me get into healthy relationships. So one of the reasons why I talk about masculine energy specifically is because I really want women to be able to identify when a man is connected to a healthy masculine energy and when a man is actually not embodying a healthy masculine energy. Because in reality, many women, and actually Jordan Peterson talked about this in an interview recently, that many women today have never had a positive interaction with a man before, and many women have actually had really negative interactions with men, and it leads women to be very fearful of any expression of masculinity. And since most women aren't really taught how to distinguish between when a man is embodying healthy masculinity, when a man is sort of faking masculinity and it's not true healthy masculinity, or when a man is just not embodying his masculine energy at all, because women aren't taught this, they don't really know how to identify it. And what I really want to do is I want to arm women with the knowledge and some examples that you can see in the media, so you can actually see it in action, so you know what to look for. So women can actually feel much more empowered to be able to identify when a man is actually embodying healthy masculine traits or when he isn't. Because the more women keep getting into these unhealthy relationships with men, the more women become wounded, the more that they judge men, the more that they despise masculine energy, which masculine energy is wonderful. It's essential to the world. It absolutely is, in the same way that feminine energy is essential. But if women live live in fear of masculine energy because they're unfamiliar with how to identify when it actually exists in a healthy form, then women are either going to push it away or they're going to fall for men who are embodying a very unhealthy version of it. So while I would be honored if men came to my content and actually were inspired to step up, the purpose behind my content really is to connect to women and to really be able to express, because as a woman, I feel like I'm able to express to women how to identify these things a little bit better than maybe a man can. And I think there are a lot of women out there who may take learning about masculinity from a woman maybe a little bit better, because I know, for example, there's sometimes when I see men talk to women about femininity, and even sometimes when I agree with them, it feels a little bit like, because they're expressing it in a way that a man would express it. So I hope that my content in expressing things like masculine energy and masculinity coming from a woman and expressing it in a way that hopefully women will be able to really connect to will just help women be able to identify that, first of all, masculinity is not bad, it's actually wonderful, and will help women be able to identify and attract the type of man that they truly want in their life and not have to constantly suffer with a whole lot of men that are just really not what they want. So let's get into Robin Hood. This movie was long and there were a lot of different stories and a lot of different things going on, so I'm just going to highlight a few points. As far as movies about masculinity goes, this movie is good and it's got some really good examples in it, so I would recommend checking it out. It's not my favorite movie as far as masculinity examples. I mean, 300 is probably my favorite movie about representations of masculinity. Robin Hood actually has some scenes that remind me a little bit of 300. This part of it is kind of about defeating a tyrannical leader and trying to fight for the people and things like that. Like there's a lot of similarities there. One thing that I do like about this movie is because when you have the character of Robin, you really do kind of see him go through some transitions as the movie goes, and he kind of evolves as a person. He is a very masculine man at his core, and he always throughout the entire movie embodies very masculine traits, but in the beginning he's a bit disconnected from his purpose in life. He's a little bit lost. And he even makes a comment at one point in the very beginning of the movie that like he doesn't owe anybody anything. He's not in service to God or man or a king or something like that. There's an interesting thing about that, because in reality, masculine energy is meant to serve. I know that's controversial because a lot of people think of the feminine as being in service because that's kind of our modern day traditional idea, but in reality, masculine energy is designed to serve. It's a giving energy and it's meant to be in service to something greater than himself. Think about some of the most masculine careers, like careers that are traditionally masculine. Police, law enforcement, military, things like that. What do? Protect and serve. They're serving something greater than themselves. In some cases, that is God and the divine. In some cases, that is an ideology or something. In order for a man to be masculine, he needs a purpose. He needs a purpose in life, and that purpose needs to be greater than himself. It needs to be greater than his own ego needs. That's not to say that a man can't have needs, that a man can't have things that he wants for himself. It just means that his overall purpose in life needs to be to serve an idea that is greater than himself. If a man is basically just doing a purpose because he's a slave to money, he's a slave to power, he's not really stepped into his full masculine energy. So in the beginning of this, Robin really, you know, he's an honest man. It's established very early on in the beginning that he has a lot of skills. He does this thing with the cups where it's like, you know, find the ball in the cups, and people think that he's scamming them, and it turns out he's not. He has a really great sense of honesty. They even refer to him as like an honest man. The king actually goes to him for an honest opinion about things, and he gives an honest opinion. He's got bravery, courage, all of these amazing masculine qualities. He just hasn't fully stepped into his masculine energy because he has not found a purpose greater than himself. He's a little bit lost. You find out he was essentially orphaned when he was young. He hasn't had a true father figure in his life. He didn't remember much about his father at that point in the movie. And so while he had a ton of masculine qualities, he hadn't quite fully stepped into his own because he hadn't found that greater purpose. He ends up in a situation where he comes across these soldiers who have been ambushed, and he finds one who's actually in the process of dying. And he basically asks Robin as his final request that the sword that he carries, which belonged to his father, be returned to his father. And Robin says he will, and there's actually this moment where they're both bleeding, and Robin agrees that he will, and one of the other men says, like, this is an agreement in blood. Like, you've agreed to this. It's a blood promise. You have to do this. And Robin's a little bit kind of like, whatever. It's not that big a deal. But you can tell that because he's got so much honor within him that he really wants to fulfill this. He's somebody who wants people to think he doesn't care. He wants to believe he doesn't really care about anything else, but in reality he does. And I've actually mentioned this in a few other videos. There's an endearing quality about a man who thinks he's just living from ego and thinks that he's selfish, but actually has a big heart. You see that in Han Solo from Star Wars. I think you see that to some extent in Rocky. I did a breakdown of that movie as well. There's something about a man, you usually see this in a man who thinks that he's just, you know, got an ego, thinks he doesn't care about anybody, but in reality he actually does. There's a very endearing quality about that. It doesn't work in reverse. When somebody actually thinks that they're a sensitive person, but actually are just in their ego, that's someone you want to stay away from. That's not a good quality in a person. So Robin goes on this quest to find this man's father to return the son's sword to this man, and he ends up coming across Maid Marian living on this farm. And this is a town that is, basically the towns in England are being essentially destroyed by this tyrannical king, who I'm going to get to in a minute. But Robin essentially goes back. You find out that this soldier was actually Marian's husband. She's been there on this farm taking care of her father-in-law, who's elderly and going blind. Robin returns the sword, and the father basically asks Robin if he will pretend to be his son who has returned from war, so that he can pretend to be Marian's husband, so that when he dies, Marian won't be forced to let go of the farm. Because back in that time, a woman wouldn't have been allowed to keep land necessarily if she didn't have a husband. So Robin agrees, and Marian is hesitant. She doesn't really trust Robin yet, which they have a really interesting dynamic, which I'm going to get into in more detail, but I want to kind of follow Robin for a second. So Robin basically starts to get to know this elderly man, and you find out that this man knew Robin's father, and actually fills in a lot of the blanks for Robin about his father. And you find out that Robin's father basically was an activist, essentially. He had this greater purpose, and he really wanted people to rise and try to recapture their own rights. There's this idea of the people rising up and wanting freedom, of democracy, of that kind of stuff. It has that kind of feel to it. You also find out that his father was killed because of his beliefs. And there's the implication that Robin is going to take on his father's role, and he really does, which in reality gives Robin a purpose. Now, I've mentioned in other videos that very often the masculine has to kill off the father, not literally, but like emotionally kill off the father in order to step into his own man. That doesn't necessarily mean that the son can't follow in the father's footsteps. It doesn't mean that the son can't live on the father's legacy. That doesn't mean that. However, in this movie, in this case, the father was literally killed off, and the son then grows to an adult and then makes the decision to carry on his father's legacy. Part of this is really a matter of choice. Robin didn't have to live on his father's legacy. He experienced life and actually went off. He was a soldier. He experienced different things in life, and then he came to the conclusion that he wanted to live on his father's legacy because it was a choice, not because it was something that he had to do or was forced into doing. And that's an important aspect of things. Like, as a man, you can absolutely carry on a family business or carry on a father's legacy or something like that. It is important as a masculine man to tune into, are you doing it because you're trying to please your father, or are you doing it because this is truly something you believe in? If it's truly something you believe in and you feel like you were meant to do, then go for it. If you're doing it solely to please or get approval from your father, that's where you're probably going to end up building resentment, because you're going to be doing something that is not in alignment for you. I mean, for anyone in reality, but especially when you're talking about a masculine man, and I think this happens a lot in society today, where there are a lot of men in general who are taking on roles and responsibilities of things that are not in alignment for them. They're just being told this is what they should do. This happens to women as well, but in this particular case, talking about men. If men go and they get a certain job because they believe it's going to make them a certain income, but they don't really care about the job, they don't really care about the company, it's these men that are sitting there and like counting down the days until retirement or counting down the days to their vacations or things like that. They're resenting their job, they're resenting their life, they're probably resenting the family that maybe pressured them into taking this job in the first place. They may go home, they may resent their families for putting them in a situation where they have to have this job in order to support them. That's not true healthy masculine energy. And when I talk about masculine service, I think there are a lot of men out there who think that this sacrifice that they're making of their life is their service. And for some people it might be, but I think it's really important, especially because I don't think men are actually encouraged in our society to really take a look at, okay, what is your purpose in life? Like, I think a lot of men get either their lives lined up for them, like this is what you have to do and this is your path, and other people decide it for them, and they don't actually step into their own and say, okay, what path do I want? Which way do I want to go? Or you get men who aren't handed a path at all, and men who kind of don't do anything or are just lost and don't really have any direction and don't really actually tune into what it is that they want. Like, what is their greater purpose in life? Like, what is their reason for waking up every day? Like, what is their reason for being here? And some end up latching on to negative behaviors, things like promiscuity or drugs and alcohol or things like that. Aren't real true purposes in being here, but they're kind of these things that some of these men just latch on to because they don't really have any direction or purpose in life. If you notice, a lot of times, especially with Robin, he's so focused and grounded. Even like, and there's an event where there's like a party and all the men are kind of partying, and or there's a bar scene or whatever when all these things are happening. Like, Robin is very still. Like, he has a stillness, a groundedness about him. He's not erratic. He's not someone who just gets drunk and parties and things like that. Like, he's very focused in what he does. He's very directional. What does he want to do at this party where everybody's just sort of like having fun and everything? He wants to sit and he wants to talk to this old man and learn more about his father. It's that grounded focus and that stability, even when he doesn't really know what he's doing. I mean, he's kind of lost at this point, but he still has that grounded stability and focus and direction. Like, that's the sign of a true masculine man. Now, Robin's relationship with Maid Marian is actually not the central part of the movie. It's kind of a subtle thread that happens in the movie, but it is interesting how it does progress very subtly. Maid Marian as a character is interesting, although I don't love the way that they portrayed her. She's basically been left with this farmland that she has to deal with for 10 years because her husband has been off at war. And she has developed this very masculine sense of leadership. She's good at protecting her land. Like, she's developed a lot of masculine qualities within herself. And that's one of the things that we forget in our society sometimes, is that no matter how feminine a woman is, when there's an absence of masculine energy, she will tune into her own. Women are very adaptable. Women are very programmed to step into whatever they need to do for survival. So for women, if they are in a situation where there is no masculine energy around, they will tap into their own. And some women can get very good at it. That's what we're seeing now today in our society a lot. And a lot of men complain that women are too masculine, but at the end of the day, if women are put in a situation where they have to be in their masculine for survival, they're going to do it. Now, in reality, most women, while they may get great at tapping into their masculine energy, they're probably going to end up having some adverse side effects, very likely health complications, mental and physical. Like, when a woman is truly feminine at her core, if she has to be in her masculine all the time, eventually that's probably going to catch up with her. That doesn't mean that she can't use her masculine when she needs to, but if she feels like she always has to be in her masculine, it's gonna wear down on her. Like, most women are gonna get totally burnt out from that. Most women today are burnt out from that. So this is a really great example of somebody who, I mean, she was put in the situation. I mean, she didn't ask for the war. Her husband went off to war. She was left with this land she had to care for. She was doing what she had to do. And she developed some really great masculine skills along the way. But it did make it more difficult for her to tap into her feminine energy when she actually was presented with a masculine partner who she really wanted to connect with. Now, in this movie, she tends to shift into her feminine pretty easily with someone like Robin, partly because it is a movie and partly because Robin is so masculine. At first, she's very blocked off from that. She's very guarded. And it's interesting because when her father-in-law essentially convinces Robin to pretend that he is Marian's husband so that she can keep the land, she basically tells him that they have to sleep in her bedchamber in order for the staff to believe that they're together. And it's interesting how she sets up a space for him in the room that's separate from where she's sleeping and she's like, you know, I sleep with a dagger next to me if you try anything or anything. Like, I mean, that's a shield up. I mean, it's a masculine shield, but it's also her dark feminine. So there's two aspects to this, right? She does have a masculine wall up as well. She also has a very strong connection to her dark feminine energy. Her dark feminine energy is the part of her that will destroy the masculine ego. And there's actually another example of that a little bit later I'm gonna get to in a minute. So she has a wall up with him where she's gonna protect herself. She's got a shield. She doesn't know this man. He hasn't really proven himself to her yet. So it's understandable, but she's still been so much in her masculine that she's blocked off from actually trusting him at this point. But she also is presenting her dark feminine of like, if you step out of line, I will destroy you. That's the dark feminine coming out. Dark feminine is the part of women that we tend to like to suppress. Like, we want women to be all sugar and spice and anything nice, but that's only part of feminine energy. And I have a whole video talking about the dark feminine that goes into this deeper, but Marion really does, over the course of time, as Robin keeps showing up and showing that he is honorable, showing that he is being loyal, showing that he actually does care and is willing to protect, he's willing to provide. He actually ends up getting some seeds so they can grow some crops and stuff, because that's been part of their problem, is they don't have seeds in order to actually plant and things like that. He consistently shows up, and as that happens, she becomes more and more warm and nurturing to him, because he's showing that he is trustable. He's showing that he is willing to step up and be a masculine leader. And she's now feeling like, oh, I don't have to be in charge all the time. Now, can she kick in and be in her masculine again anytime she needs to? Yeah, she proves that throughout the movie. But it's that relaxation of the feminine when they're with a true masculine partner, somebody who is actually safe and someone who is a protector and provider, and somebody who can take over the role of being masculine so she doesn't have to all the time. That can relax the feminine nervous system like nothing else. It is unbelievably healing for a woman to be around a man like that. And she really does soften. As the movie goes on, she becomes more and more warm and nurturing to him. She literally warms to him because he keeps showing that he's going to step up. They have a really beautiful scene together at a party when they decide to dance together. And it's supposed to be to kind of play things up like they're a couple for the staff, but oh, their intensity and their presence with each other and the way that he looks at her and his focus and attention is, oh, that's gonna melt the feminine heart. It absolutely will. It's that focused attention and that presence and that fully seeing her. He's not judging her. He's not telling her, you're too rough, you're too masculine, you're too this. He sees how strong she is. He sees how powerful she is. And it inspires him to be even greater. I mean, in reality, once he connects with her, and even though they're kind of pretending to be together, even though they're really falling in love with each other, it's part of what's inspiring him to step up. And yes, a part of that is him reconnecting with, essentially, you know, Marion's father-in-law, who is essentially becomes like a father figure to him. I mean, there's a lot of other circumstances that happen, but a big part of that is him being with Marion. And he's now learning to care about something other than just what's right in front of him. He's learning to care about another human. At one point when Robin is getting ready to go off to war, Marion's like, I've said goodbye to a soldier going off to war once before and he never came back. And he like looks her in the face and he's like, ask me nicely. That's actually a really sexy way for a man to give an order. And they have this moment and they kiss and he says, I love you. He's taking the lead. He's taking charge and she feels so safe with him. It's this really beautiful moment with them, like where he gets to step into this, yeah, I'm the leader. I'm in charge now. I'm your man. I'm coming back to you. We're together, and like that moment where she can just be soft with him. I will admit that she ends up showing up later like on horseback, like in full battle gear. Like, I don't know. For me, that felt a little off where he's all of a sudden like letting her lead her troops and things. For me, that felt a little bit weird. But there was a really amazing example of her dark feminine that happened when basically their town got invaded and they found out that she was Robin's like pretend wife, and one of the men who was invading the town essentially captured her, put her in a room, and was obviously going to assault her. She kind of like goes to seduce him, and then she basically like destroys him. Like she puts the hammer down, you know what I mean? Dark feminine sees a man who is completely out of integrity. He's out of alignment. He's in his ego. He's just on a power trip, and she's like, I will destroy you. For most women, that's probably not going to be like a dagger to the back or something like that. However, there is something to the fact that the dark feminine will see a man in his ego, and she's going to be like, I want to destroy him. Like, I want to rip his head off. That's the dark feminine coming out. out. We suppress that in our world today. Because I think a lot of people, particularly men, fear that. They fear the dark feminine. A lot of women feel the dark feminine in ourselves. I mean, the part of us that knows that if a man is out of alignment, that if a man is out of integrity, that we can put the hammer down, that we could destroy him. Like I mentioned in the Titanic breakdown that I did, like the feminine is like the ocean. Like it can be beautiful and soft and serene, but it can also kill. That scene where like basically this man is about to assault Marion and she kind of seduces him to distract him and then basically just like kills him. She destroys him. She takes him out. I'm not suggesting we emulate that in real life, but that energy of it, that energy of like, hey, this man's a creep. He's out of alignment. He's operating from ego. He's not a safe man. Like that part of you that kicks in that's just like, no, I will not put up with this. I will not tolerate this. I will not tolerate any man who is not in full integrity. I will not tolerate any man who is not a strong masculine leader. I will not tolerate that. That's an important part of the feminine. It's an important part of being a woman is to not just let a man sink into his ego, to not let a man just tell you what to do all the time, to not let a man operate as some tyrannical king, which I'm going to get to that in a minute. It's not just let men get away with whatever it is that they want. Like as women, it's part of our responsibility. It's part of our feminine energy to hold men to a certain standard and to be like, hey, if you're out of integrity, if you're out of alignment, I will put the hammer down. I don't care. You know, that's part of our role as women. And that part has been really suppressed over the years. And it's really important that we really tap into that because it can sometimes be interpreted as a masculine shield. And I think like if, for example, if Marion had not let Robin into her heart, because she believed that all men were like these bad men that were out there, then that would be a problem. When you as a woman can soften around a man who is in integrity, and an important part of that is to be able to tell when a man is in integrity and when he's not. When a man has shown you that he is reliable, honest, that he is a strong masculine leader, that he is trustable, and you can soften, then the men who are not in integrity, the men who are not trustable, they're gonna soften with them. It's not your job to be soft and sweet with people who are using you, who are abusing you, who are completely out of integrity, who are tyrannical kings and just running around operating from ego. That's not what being feminine is. Part of being feminine is using your intuition and tuning into when to a man is actually somebody who is worthy of your surrender, is worthy of your, if you want to use the word submission, is worthy of your softness. Because if he's not, then you don't have to give him your softness. You should be able to connect your softness in yourself for yourself, absolutely. But if a man is trying to force you into your softness and it doesn't feel in alignment for you, and your dark feminine is like, I won't tolerate this, listen to your dark feminine because dark feminine is pretty smart. It was a scene that I didn't remember from watching the movie, and I don't know if maybe I just accidentally missed it or something, but I found it when I was finding clips for this movie where one of the storyline themes in this, which I think is a big representation, this movie does reference fathers a lot. The idea that because so many men in this, well, in England really, but especially in this village in Nottingham, because so many of the men have gone off to war and they've been off to war for like 10 years. So a lot of the children they left behind are running wild. Like they're chaotic, they're basically vandals, they're thieves, they're kind of living off the land, they're all, you know, destroying everything around them because they haven't had solid father figures. And it's interesting how there is a scene where they attack Robin. He schools them, like he really does. You know, they're basically trying to tell him that they're soldiers like him, and it's like, no, soldiers fight for a cause. Like, what's your cause? And like, they're like, I don't know, like they didn't have a cause. And he's like, no, if you're not fighting for a cause, you're just poachers. Like that kind of thing where it's like, if you're just doing this, if you're just fighting, if you're just vandalizing things or beating people up or something, just for your own ego or just for your own needs, you're not a true soldier. Like you're not a true masculine man. Like a true masculine man is doing these things for a greater purpose, for a cause, right? I really love that scene because it really does embody what a masculine leader looks like. Like young boys especially, but I mean I would say grown men nowadays because we've been deprived of strong masculine leadership for so long. Young boys need a strong masculine leader, and that doesn't necessarily have to specifically just be their father, but traditionally masculine elders in a community who were revered as being you know, healthy masculine leaders would take young boys and would actually train them to become men. And in this scene, this is just kind of a snippet of it, but it's, you know, Robin is basically telling these young boys, like, what it means to be a man, like what it means to step up and what it means to fight for something greater than yourself. There's another aspect to this too. We look at the kings and their royalty in this movie. This I find fascinating because you have King Richard, who's currently king, and he's fighting, he's at war. And he's obviously not perfect because he's a little bit conflicted about the war. There's questions as to whether or not his war is actually in integrity or whether it's not, but he's fighting with his soldiers. Like, he's obviously willing to be there with his soldiers and willing to fight the fight. At least in this movie, it appears like he's not necessarily going to ask people to fight for him if he's not willing to show up himself. And he also, at one point in the beginning of the movie, he's looking for honest men. He respects honesty, even if it's not what he wants to hear. He even says, like, are you willing to be honest with a king, even if it's not what he wants to hear, that kind of thing. A masculine man will value honesty, again, even if it's not what he wants to hear. A man in his ego will only want to hear what he wants to hear. So a man in his ego is not going to be able to take honest feedback, to take honest criticism from someone. Whereas a truly, like, healthy masculine man, he may not love constructive criticism. He may not love to hear things that he doesn't want to hear. It might enact his ego at some point, and I have some videos about ego versus soul and aspects of narcissism when it comes to ego and things like that. It's normal for people to have an ego reaction. We're all human. Humans all have an ego to a certain extent. It's a matter of, can you work through them? Can, like, you take that thing, that criticism, that, you know, constructive criticism maybe, or that truth that you may not like to hear, can you take that, and if it triggers your ego, like, you know, how can you work through that? Like, can you move through that? Can you take it for what it is? Can you accept certain parts of it that might be true? Like, what can you do? If you can't handle that at all, like if your ego just keeps blocking it, that's usually when you have a problem. But having an ego reaction isn't necessarily, I mean, it's normal, it's human, but if you're stuck in your ego reaction to things, that's usually when you have a problem. Now, when King Richard gets killed, his brother John takes over, and now King John is the epitome of an unhealthy masculine man. I mean, wow. I mean, just repeatedly, he has zero respect for women, really. He treats his mother horribly. I mean, he's essentially having sex with his mistress, and his mother basically comes in to scold him, and he just, like, standing there naked in front of his mother, like, you know, like, what are you gonna do about it? You have this mother who is the mother of kings. When it becomes evident that somebody who John has trusted is essentially a traitor and that the throne is basically at risk, basically nobody can go to the king because he doesn't believe anything, he doesn't want to listen to anybody. So they go to his mother, and his mother is just like, so I have to go to the king and scold him like a child or tell him what to do. The mother of the king, she's kind of like, yeah, like, that's gonna work, right? Part of this is that John was married and he's asked the Pope for an annulment because he wants to marry this French woman that he's having an affair with. I get the impression in the movie that they haven't gotten married yet, but she's by his side as the future queen. So what his mother does is his mother goes to the potential queen and is like, you have to tell John that all this is happening, that his throne is basically at risk and this and that. And she's like, I don't have to do anything. And she's basically like, no, someone else can do it. I'm not doing it. And the mother is basically telling her, like, if you want to be queen, you better do it. There is a sense that the mother knows this guy is in his ego. There's no way he's going to listen to his mother. So essentially what the future mother-in-law is telling her is, if you want to be queen, like if you want to be the queen, really, in your relationship, in this case it's literal, but if you want to be the queen, you're gonna have to make sure that your husband is acting right, that your husband knows what he's supposed to do. She's basically telling this woman that, hey, look, I've been his mother for this long. I've been having to tell him what to do all the time. I've been having to run his life because he hasn't gotten his act together. If you want the role to now step in as queen, you're gonna have to do this. You're gonna have to step in, and you're gonna have to get him to step up and do the right thing. I think that was a smart move on the mother's part. That said, in real life, like if this was actually like reality, if you have a future mother-in-law who's coming to you and being like, hey, I've been trying to deal with my son for this long. It's your job now to essentially make sure he acts right, because I give up. I can't do this anymore. I'm not gonna lie, I actually had that kind of happen to me. I mean, not in this extreme, but kind of, and should have paid attention to the signs. I gotta be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, this is essentially what she's doing. And to some extent, the mother-in-law is a pretty good point. She's like, hey, you know, this man is king. He's stepped up. I can't just talk to him like he's a child. He's not gonna listen to me. Here's this woman who he wants to marry and he wants to sleep with and he's attracted to. Okay, you wanna be queen, you wanna be in this role, it's on you. What are you gonna do to make sure that you become queen? Because if her husband loses the throne, if he gets overthrown, she's not gonna be queen. Her being with him isn't really gonna help her much. There's so many moments in this where King John, oh, he shows so many signs of like, I mean, being a psychopath or sociopath, or for sure a narcissist. He's absolutely a narcissist. He flips so quickly that it's psychotic, really, is what it is. He'll go from like these tyrannical rages to being like sweet, and then all of a sudden he kind of lures you in with his sweetness, and then he puts the hammer down and he's cruel. I mean, that kind of thing. It's men like him, and I know this is an exaggerated version. He's a king. He refers to himself as the runt of the family who now is in power and things like that. I know this is an exaggerated version for movies, it's over dramatized, but there are men walking around the world just like him and they're meant to be avoided. Like, and I honestly, I would say for men to avoid working with men like this, but for sure women should avoid dating men like this. I mean, men like this with this mentality are absolutely dangerous to everybody. There's a really amazing scene where I know that they're talking about a country, like they're talking about land, but I would say that this speech could happen and symbolize relationships as well. But you have this tyrannical king who basically is lording his leadership over everybody. He's using his power to demand respect from his people. It's like, well, I have the crown, you have to respect me. And Robin steps in to speak, and he gives this speech about, you know, how the king is expecting loyalty from people and they're getting nothing from him in return. Essentially, that if he were to empower his people to be able to step up, to be able to care for themselves, to be able to get their lives together, to be able to thrive and not constantly be, you know, taxing them to death, not constantly be taking from them, to not, again, be this tyrannical leader who's basically just lording their power over people and actually empowering people to be the best version of themselves and to step up, the people would be more loyal to the king, but they would also love him and not do it out of fear. I mean, the concept of this really, I mean, I think, again, I mean, this could be a political statement, but this could also be about relationships. When you have a, you know, we think of like the man as being like the king of the castle type of thing. If you have a man who is a tyrannical king, he's a tyrannical king, he comes home and he expects everybody in his home to basically serve him because he's the boss, he's the leader, he's in power, he's in charge, and he lords that power over everybody, then people might follow him because they fear him, but they're probably not really going to respect him, and they're definitely not going to love him. Whereas when you have a man who leads, we'll say a family in this case, because I'm using this as a metaphor, leads his family as a true masculine leader, but he's leading in the best interests of the family unit, the whole household, in a way that empowers everybody in the household to be the best version of themselves and to bring their gifts to the relationship, to the family. And he leads in a way that highlights people's strengths and actually treats people in a loving way, then not only will the members of his family, particularly probably his wife, will not only be more likely to respect him, but they'll also love him as well. And like, that's how you cultivate a loving relationship. There was a line where Robin mentioned about the idea that, you know, like building a kingdom is like building a cathedral. You got to start from the ground up, right? Like, you need the groundwork. You need things to be healthy. If you're just leading from up here and bossing people around, you don't have that like strong foundation of trust. You don't have that like masculine grounding. Like, I always talk about grounded masculine energy. If masculine energy is not rooted in the ground, if it's all from ego, it's not going to feel stable. Masculine energy needs stability. So if someone's leading as this tyrannical king from his ego, it's not going to feel stable. Whereas if you're leading from a grounded masculine energy, it's going to feel more stable for people. And seeing the difference between a tyrannical king like King John and seeing the difference between that and like Robin's embodiment of masculine energy. I mean, I think both men and women could really benefit from watching a movie like this and seeing that contrast between when you're leading from ego, when you're leading from like a grounded masculine strength. This movie does do a really great job of that representation. I wouldn't say that the love story in this, I mean, it's nice, but it's not necessarily the highlight of the movie. But this movie does do a really great job of showing the difference between healthy and unhealthy masculine energy. So I'm grateful that this film was requested. I have to be honest with you, I have not seen that many movies with Russell Crowe in them. In this movie in particular, I get the appeal. I get why he was a sex symbol in his day. If you have any thoughts on this movie or anything I mentioned in this movie or any other suggestions, film requests, anything like that, let me know. Leave a comment in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. I love your suggestions. If you haven't seen this movie, I recommend you check it out after you watch this video. See if you can pick up on some of the things I mentioned. I'm gonna try to do little individual film clips of some scenes, put them on like my TikTok, YouTube shorts, as long as the copyright lets me do that, just so you can kind of see some of these energies in individual scenes. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you're a woman who'd like to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.